Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Democratic View. And my name is Phyllis Italiano, and I have with me today a very, very special man who's going to talk about probably the most important thing we can ever talk about, which is our water. And his name is Kevin McAllister, and he's our Peconic Baykeeper. And I would like to start, Kevin, because I always like to know something more about who it is that I'm interviewing. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and where you came from?
Sure. I grew up on Moriches Bay. I think really seeped in the waters at a very young age. I'm blessed to live by the water and really connected to it. I followed a track. My academic path was in marine sciences and coastal zone management. I moved to Florida for a number of years and worked along shorelines and wetland areas and government for a number of years, and returned in '98 with my wife and son to come back to roots, and now I reside in Quag. I consider myself a very well-credentialed scientist. So
you really just got interested because you lived by water? Because I also had, an awful lot of water in my life. I went to Jamesport as a young kid at my aunt's place, and then spent 35 years in Fire Island. And but I never became a scientist. I became a teacher instead. I did teach science for a while. So tell us what exactly the Peconic Baykeeper is about.
Okay. We're a very, independent clean water group, clear voice for clean water. Independent in the sense that, we don't receive funding from government, and oftentimes we have to actually be very critical of government's management of our water resources. We're part of a larger movement called Waterkeeper Alliance, which Robert Kennedy Jr. heads up. There's probably over 200 organizations internationally now. And I think really what sets us apart is that we are staunch advocates for the water. We understand the laws, know how to apply them, and particularly the Federal Clean Water Act. By the way, 40th anniversary in October, and we should be celebrating that. And also that act is under siege in Congress. There's certainly segments of Congress that want to see that really go away because they feel it's stymieing economic growth.
Dear. Well, I was mentioning the gal who started this show, Debbie Kluger, who's a trustee, and she and I have, I sort of like, she's my mentor, even though I could be her mother. But she has told me, and I know this to be a fact, that water, portable water, is going to take the place of oil. It's going to be that valuable in this next, let's say, 50 years. And how are we going to maintain our water on the east end of Long Island?
Well, let me start by saying basically our land-based water sources, our aquifers, are intrinsically connected to surface waters. So where goes groundwater, there goes our bays. And actually, we just, fresh off the press, we released our 2012 Baywatch, really with a focus principally on water pollution. We're drawing attention to the number of what's called impaired waters. These are classified waters as polluted from New York State. It's an alarming number, over 100 in Suffolk County. East Hampton Town certainly has a handful, and unfortunately, largely from wastewater. So really our sewage is now catching up with us in the groundwater train. So, the Fort Ponds and the Lake Montauks and Northwest Creeks, and the list goes on, are suffering from over-nitrification principally from wastewater.
So what are we going to do about this problem? How are we going to, I know we had this forum that one of the trustees, Linda Minderbaum, put on. And there was some gentlemen came and talked about water and our scavenger waste situation. And we are all anxious to find some answers of what we're going to do about our water. What are we going to do? How are we going to make it work?
Well, we have We have serious problems. We're seeing brown tides and red tides, basically reoccurring on an annual basis. And again, all roads lead to wastewater. The nitrogen from groundwater is being carried from our household cesspools. We have a very primitive manner in which we manage wastewater, basically a hole in the ground. It's unknown to most people in their backyard. Somewhere in the backyard is my cesspool. Well, that cesspool is contributed to the groundwater stream. The groundwater stream is now reaching surface waters and degrading our waters. So we're looking for bold actions. We have petitioned New York State DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation, charging that they are in violation of the Federal Clean Water Act for failure to adequately protect our waters. So we're looking for more restrictive discharge standards. So ultimately what comes out of a household cesspool as well as a sewage treatment plant, a scavenger waste plant, for instance. We've got to really do a much better job of ensuring that the nitrogen levels in that wastewater has been greatly reduced.
You're absolutely right. I have no idea what's in my backyard. I know it's there, and I know where it is. I just have no idea what it is. I don't know. I mean, I have heard from this guy, Pio Lombardo.
Pio Lombardo, yes.
Okay, I have heard that there is something that you can get, but it's very expensive.
He has a system, it's state of the art. The county just approved it in December. It's called Nitrix, that's the trade name for it, and it's probably the most effective denitrification system on the market and it can be scaled for household size as well as condominiums, apartment complexes, and larger, even neighborhoods. We've got to move away, and these costs that we attribute to, better technologies, there's no excuse not to, and there's culpability and responsibility on the part of town government, particularly if there's public health risks. For instance, Lake Montauk, the southern end of that lake relative to Ditch Plains neighborhood, where there's conveyance coming from septic systems via ditches directly into that lake. That bathing beach is no longer swimmable because high bacterial contamination, not to mention nitrogen levels. And if the town of East Hampton turns a blind eye to that and tries to dismiss it, they are accountable for basically to the public for a pollution problem that's under their watch.
My mouth is dropping open.
As it should.
This is very serious.
It is very serious, and I'm not trying to cry fire in the theater here. I'm trying to provide a wake-up call to your viewers, to the entire East End. This isn't an Up Island issue. This isn't Babylon and Nassau County. This is here and present. And I just went through a short list of impaired waters. Lake Montauk is on that. And again, through testing, we know there's high bacterial contamination, very likely from human source. So we're talking household cesspools are polluting our waters. So what are we going to do about it?
I don't know. What are we going to do?
We need to act. All new development needs to incorporate state-of-the-art treatment. Yes, it costs more. But again, at what value do you place on a healthy bay versus a sour bay? A Lake Montauk or Fort Pond that are no longer swimmable because of high contamination, or just reoccurring brown tides where there's fish kills chronically. You talk about cost implications to this community, East Hampton town, should these bays really go south on us in a very become polluted without any hope of recovery. And you will see that tourist base, they'll find Nantucket or Cape Cod. They're not coming to East Hampton if these waters are foul.
Yeah, you have no idea how that frightens me, because I took my swim this morning in my Gardeners Bay, which I absolutely adore, which is why I live here. I live here for Gardeners Bay. I live here to swim for as long as I can until it gets, freezing cold. And to be without my bay would be
and you're fortunate. The further east we are, we're basically intermingled with more ocean water. So you get the flushing. So Gardeners Bay is in good shape.
Yeah.
But again, when you start getting into these tributaries, you mean the 3 Mile Harbors, the Northwest Creeks, Lake Montauks. Now we're getting up into areas that don't have the flush and that are more, connected to land-based influences, homes and yards. And again, back to cesspools.
So if I were to ever be able to afford to get nitrix, and that's the name, something,
Yes.
something like that, what about everybody else on my street?
We have to phase this in over time. The built environment, meaning the existing neighborhoods, at the time of replacement, we've got to strive to incorporate these state-of-the-art systems, and we have to find, and government, has to find a way to help offset those costs.
It's exactly what, it was
Yeah.
like when the oil tanks had to be above ground and no longer in the ground. You got a tax write-off for it, and I did it as soon as I knew about it, I've only owned my house for 10 years anyway, but I did it right away. If somebody would say, oh, I'll give you a tax write-off or something like that, I would try my best to make sure that I could do something like that. But that's got to come from somebody in government somewhere.
Well, there has to be help, but there also has to be a commitment. And I think, use the term, the low-hanging fruit is all new construction. We spend more on Belgian block trimming our driveways than we invest in wastewater treatment. And to me, that's inexcusable.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
that
it's
is crazy.
the reality. And so, again, we got to figure this out. We got to have the discussion. I've been a staunch critic of both local government as well as Suffolk County in particular for kicking this can down the road as long as they have. It's caught up to us. Our bays should not be this color. That's unacceptable. It's inexcusable. Wow. And this is what we see locally as well. I want to move into one other important issue, and I know it's appearing prominently now locally, and that's the county's mosquito control program, which is a colossal charade, and I hope your viewers understand this. The whole bogeyman of West Nile virus, there are 40,000 people die a year from the common flu in this country, and yet we don't have that same response. My organization has been at the forefront of addressing the poisons that are being applied both through aerial spraying as well as applied to the marshlands for larval control. These are highly toxic. The state of Connecticut just released a study about a month ago identifying high levels of pesticides associated with mosquito control in lobsters. And the state's response was, well, the meat's safe to eat. But meanwhile, it's, the organs are tainted with this, affecting reproduction, growth, survival. I mean, the list goes on. This community has to really rise up and reject the notion that we need an institutional program for mosquito control. We're being sold a bill of goods. It's a boondoggle program that's strictly about, you talk about pork barrel funding. And Mr. Ballone, and if he's listening or sees this, the austere budget that we've experienced in Suffolk County over the last couple of years and how he's got to cut, he's cutting jobs and meanwhile doesn't touch vector control. Vector control is about one thing, it's nuisance control, and it's about keeping the little machine, the internal machine going. And, I think at some point we're trying to put the spotlight on this, but it's imperative that I think the communities, particularly on the East End, really rise up and just say, we reject the program, you're not spraying your poisons in our neighborhoods, and that's what we have to do.
I remember when we were at Fire Island that one time Suffolk County came to spray, and a guy who lived on my street went and stood in front of them and wouldn't let them spray.
Phyllis, I've responded over the years to the fish kills, the crab kills. I get the phone calls from somebody's bait trap, killie trap in their backyard, on waterfront property. The helicopters come over and everything's dead. The crabbers, they watch the flyovers, they pull their pots, they got dead crabs for 4 or 5 days until they start to recover and the water's basically, starting to assimilate the pesticides, only to start catching crabs again until the next spray every 2 weeks. So we're killing marine life out there. I'm not a physician, so I can't even tell you about the human implications, but I can tell you, I wouldn't want my child out there on the streets, and they actually notify you to get indoors. and yet they'll tell you this stuff is all safe. You know, it's a colossal lie, and Suffolk County, and particularly the county legislature, should be ashamed themselves for turning the blind eye to a program that is destructive and costly, and again, just inexcusable.
So who I really have to get in contact with is Mr. Schneiderman, who is my representative.
Yes, and actually, Mr. Schneiderman has been a strong voice for calling into question their operations. Several years ago, we were successful in stopping them from ditching wetlands. They would carve drainage ditches through, which really allow the pollutants to flow freely. Might as well be a pipeline. In 2000, they mobilized on Napeague Marsh in Montauk. You know, we're talking hundreds of acres of wetlands. The machinery went in there, re-ditching, macerating turtles, diamondback terrapins, spotted turtles. So we're killing wildlife, not to mention just creating conveyances for pollutants from household cesspools, road ends, the list goes on. And it was to our good work that we were prevailed in getting them to stop the ditching. But, you know, the pesticide applications, unfortunately, you know, they convince people that they're going to die from West Nile, and therefore, you know, spraying poisons is warranted. And again, I go back to the common flu, 40,000 people a year, and you can confirm this with the Center for Disease Control in Washington, die from the common flu, and yet we don't have the same response to it. And yet, you know, locally here, you might hear of, I guess this year seemed to be more pronounced with several illnesses, perhaps even deaths, but you know, it doesn't warrant the response from the county with their pesticide applications.
Listen, I won't even put anything on my lawn. I mean, if I have crabgrass that's cut short, it's okay with me. I don't really care about that kind of thing.
You know, you talk about pesticides, the whole, you know, notion of the trophy lawn out here as well, you know, on Long Island. And, you know, the suburban lawn, we've defined ourselves by how manicured and dandelion-free our lawns are. And, you know, I described the you know, expenditure for Belgian block as opposed to state-of-the-art wastewater treatment. You know, the dollars that homeowners spend on chemical applications, and, you know, these companies will tell you, they will sell you their poisons and tell you you need applications every month or 4 times a year. And again, it's all just getting you hooked into the drug, hooked on drugs. So we have to start rejecting the notion of trophy lawns and these pesticide applications and start really reverting back to what this region was, which was a rural area where, again, it was healthy.
Yes, if I had my life to live over again, I would have moved from the Bronx and lived here all by myself.
And Phyllis, we wonder where the fish and the crabs and the wildlife are gone. And you know, talk about the 40th year anniversary. You know, I think it's on the cusp of Rachel Carson's book, The Silent Spring.
Yes.
If you remember that. And she was at the forefront of pesticides. The industry and government mocked her for years. And she had a strong backbone. She was a very strong woman, kept pushing and pushing, and basically brought to light the destructive nature of pesticides. And shame on Suffolk County. They were at the forefront of banning DDT, if you remember that.
I do indeed. Which
were killing our raptors due to implications to brittle eggs. We lost our osprey, our wading birds, the bald eagle. All these fish eaters were disappearing, you know, basically off the landscape, and it was all associated with DDT applications. And this county led the country. They banned DDT before the Environmental Protection Agency did. And yet we have such short memories that, you know, here we are 4 decades later, 5 decades later, and there's like no implications to the same poisons or similar poisons that are routinely sprayed on our marshes and in our neighborhoods by vector control. So I say to Jay Schneiderman, if you're watching this show, you need to step it up again, because we've got to put an end to this. And just purely on a monetary economic consideration for the county, you know, if we're so strapped financially, and yet you turn a blind eye to $3 million plus budget every year to spray poisons with the destructive nature of them, you know, shame on us all for allowing that to happen.
Well, we'll have to fight that battle as well.
Good.
Now, I want to ask you one thing. What do you think about sewers in this area?
Sewers have an application. Sewage treatment can effectively treat the wastewater, but I think we have to be very judicious and cautious about the application, because I will tell you this, my read from Suffolk County, they want to promote sewering for economic development, because right now there's constraints. Theoretically, we require 1 acre, which is not the case because the county health department issues variances, as does town boards all the time, for basically smaller lots. But ultimately, as it stands now, that's our only constraint against overdevelopment. If we promote sewers and they are linked, and this is an important thing,
yes.
Sewering for clean water is a very positive thing, but sewering just to basically build out where, simple math, 1 turns into 5 or turns into 10, and I'm talking housing units.
Yes.
The traffic, the police implications, the schools. So we've got to be very careful about this. So, when we hear sewering coming out of Suffolk County and the county executive's mouth, you've got to be very careful. And again, the two have to be decoupled. Clean water is clean water, and if that's what we're striving to protect and restore, that's one thing. But if sewering means, okay, we're going to build, baby, build, then the community as we know it will be lost.
Actually, I don't know the name of the man, but one of the professors at Stony Brook said that Long Island and the East End has reached its maximum.
Larry Swanson, Dr. Swanson.
Yes.
And he's right on the mark.
Yes.
And we have. And there's an ecological term called carrying capacity, and it pertains to wildlife. A given habitat area, could be a field or woodland, can only support X number of birds and bunnies and bees. That's the carrying capacity. That's the ecology of that area. If you apply it to human terms, we have exceeded the carrying capacity, and now we're seeing it. We're seeing the wear and tear. We're seeing bay color water like this because our sewage is now basically exceeded the tipping point. We have reached, and we are exceeding the tipping point relative to human basically influences on this land as it relates to water. And again, back to my earlier point, land use and water quality are intrinsically connected. So what happens a mile away, it may take 10, 20 years to get there, but that pesticide application or that cesspool in your backyard is going to have some influence on a nearby pond or stream or open bay eventually. And if you consider the development in the 60s and 70s and 80s, the travel times being very slow with groundwater, we're now starting to see basically that groundwater reach our surface waters, and again, seeing the implications of pollution now. And that's a fact out here, and it's not an up island issue. This is down home, right here in East Hampton town.
Lee Koppelman, who was a great planner for this area, once was quoted as saying, if he had to do it all over again, he would have bought up all the vacant land and kept it vacant.
Well,
Boy,
that's
I
it.
wish he
It's,
had.
you basically boil it all down, it comes down to dilution of that groundwater, over a given landscape. And obviously, the more open space you have, without the influences of households and lawn chemicals, et cetera, you're assured of clean groundwater by virtue of open space. So, there shouldn't be any hesitancy in supporting acquisition of open space, because at the end of the day, if we talk purely economics and economic growth, the cost implications to a built environment, again, police, traffic, roadways, schools, they far exceed any expenditure to buy that 10-acre parcel of woodland or farmland, down the street.
But the problem is getting these town boards to understand these things and to be able to see around the corner. They don't quite understand that the environment is the economy out here, and the economy is the environment. They are just like this. They're not going to stay
Phyllis,
here.
that's well said, but I'm not so sure they don't get it, or Is it their influences or being influenced by special interests?
Yes, well, you're probably
Yes.
right. And by the way, that was not my statement. That's Tim Bishop's. He's
Yes.
the one who said that to me when I
No, it's
interviewed
right
him.
on the mark.
Yeah.
But it's I'm before these boards all the time, and they hear it. And again, I'll go back to I'm a credentialed scientist. I can and immerse myself in subjects. I will get that information, or I will articulate it to these boards. The question is, do they even want to hear it? Quite often, and back to vector control, the county legislature, they chose to be lied to. They wanted to be lied to, and they had the person, head of vector control, come up there and lie to them week in and week out. And how do you deal with that? It's very difficult when the agenda is something else than really, I think, wisdom and truth, and making the right decision for your community based on really what's true and what's honest.
Well, I think I'm going to have to start calling Steve Ballone's office and ask him to come here and tell me all about
Absolutely.
why he does this.
Yeah.
Because
Let him explain his sewer plan to you and what's driving it. And I asked him a pointed question in December. Steve, I'm hearing you lead with talk about sewering, but I'm not hearing you lead with clean water protection or restoration. And his response was, well, Kevin, you have to understand we have a down economy and we've got to experience some growth.
Yes.
And that just it summed it up for me. My gut told me this is what's driving this agenda. And I just say to your viewership, pay very close attention when you hear sewering being discussed. It's a positive thing.
We will, and we're going to thank you very much for coming on today. You certainly have shaken me to my core. I will certainly go out there and start talking about this to everybody I know.
Excellent. Thank you for having me, Phyllis, all right?
That's great.
Hopefully you'll invite me back.
Wow, yes, I will. I will. We really do have to.
Good. Thank you so much.